All right, in other news, Russia has conducted fresh strikes on Ukraine's Zaporizhia region. Ukraine says Russian forces carried out 567 attacks over the last 24 hours.
Rescue workers say one person died and 26 were injured. Biggest Russian drone and missile attack of the war. Ukraine says Moscow fired 550 drones and 11 missiles overnight.
The sun had barely risen over Ukraine's eastern front when the ground began trembling with the advance of armored columns. Drone strikes rained on hospitals, silos, even a bus filled with evacuees. Nearly 200 civilian deaths in minutes. Russian confidence was absolute, but they didn't see what lay hidden beneath the farmland ahead. Within minutes, tanks were collapsing into concealed pits, armored paths turned into death zones, and retreat was sealed off by encroaching fire. The story seemed like brute force, but it became the tale of foresight prevailing at dawn. Before we move on, I would like you to subscribe to the channel and like the video. At first light, an entire wall of machines rolled forward. 180 drones buzzed overhead like a blanket of metal shadows, while 120 armored tanks clattered beneath them in a tight, almost ceremonial formation. It looked unstoppable. To anyone watching from a distance, the sight resembled a moving fortress stretching across the horizon. How could any force resist such a surge? The plan was obvious to Moscow: drain willpower before a real shot was even fired. The drones were not only tools of destruction, but instruments of fear, dispatched to disorient defenders and shred morale before the heavy columns even arrived.
To Russia launching a massive aerial assault against Ukraine.
Ukraine and Russia are exchanging fire on multiple fronts. Bridges are being destroyed, cities are burning, and oil depots are under attack. At least 7 people were injured in a missile strike, while 2 others were hospitalized, and 23 private homes, 12 apartment buildings, and a post office suffered damage.
Tanks would follow to break any fixed positions, smashing whatever resistance remained. The last part of the strategy was intended to be simple: infantry units sliding in behind, filling streets and crossroads, planting the Russian flag on conquered ground before the defenders could even react. That plan began with fire raining onto villages. Markets where farmers once traded meat and produce vanished under drone strikes. A rural clinic, serving both soldiers and children, exploded in flames, its ambulances charred within minutes. An evacuation bus marked with a red cross shattered on the roadside, scattering luggage across the asphalt like plastic confetti blown by the morning wind. The message was deliberate: there would be no safe zone, nowhere untouched. Moscow had built its strategy on speed and scale. The assumption was that shock would paralyze decision-making, leaving no window for meaningful response. Any rational calculation suggested the first wave left Ukraine without choices. The only option would be retreat. But Moscow's confidence masked a critical oversight. Weeks before the armored columns were even ordered forward, farmland between villages had been transformed by patient hands into what amounted to a weapon in itself. Entire stretches of wheat fields were altered to hide teeth beneath the soil. Steel-spiked pits lay waiting beneath deceptively firm surfaces, camouflaged with straw and loose dirt spread carefully to replicate natural ground. Some roadways were left deliberately empty, but their openness concealed thin crusts that could not bear the weight of armored tracks. Below the fields, narrow tunnels stretched between farmhouses, cellars, and wooden barns, allowing defenders to move unseen and coordinate as though the soil itself carried their voices. This quiet preparation remained invisible to the drone cameras flying overhead. What appeared as open farmland was in fact a silent labyrinth. From above, Russian commanders saw only plain ground. The infantry advancing behind the armored columns read no warning signs. It looked safe, even inviting, as if defenses had already collapsed. Engines roared, tracks churned, and the line pushed forward without hesitation. But the earth did not agree. Within minutes of the first squadron rolling into what they thought was clear ground, steel gave way to steel. 11 tanks crumpled into waiting pits, crashing nose first into cavities that swallowed them like open jaws. Crews trapped inside had to abandon hatches, scrambling into gunfire-free silence, as no Ukrainian bullet had yet been fired. The battlefield shifted instantly. What started as an unstoppable advance transformed into frantic radio calls and distorted signals echoing through Russia's own ranks. The sheer weight of machines became useless once the soil turned against them. So the question remains for anyone watching. Was brute firepower ever enough, or had they simply driven headlong into a design carved by foresight? The first losses were devastating in scale, yet cost nothing in ammunition for the defenders. And as dawn settled with smoke drifting upward from the toppled tanks, Russia discovered something worse than defeat by fire. They had only collided with the opening layer of the trap. The farmland still held answers that Moscow had not begun to imagine. Once the tanks buckled into chaos, what followed was not retreat, but a collapse into something far worse. Russian commanders tried to push infantry forward, convinced the path ahead had only shallow resistance. Instead, that movement stretched their lines too far, leaving the armored wrecks behind them, blocking communication, while forward squads moved unsupported. As soldiers advanced across uneven ground, new orders became garbled. Radio traffic clogged under reports from distressed tank crews, and entire units lost contact with their command structure. In that confusion, Ukrainian artillery hidden among tree lines came alive. Concealed batteries sat idle for hours waiting, and now their timing was exact. Shells thundered into the scattered troop columns, tearing gaps across fields already choked with smoke. From afar, locals described the impact of those first salvos like bursts of lightning ripping from forest shadows. The infantry pressed unwillingly into what looked like a shallow defense, but the pace of their movement only exposed them further. Attempts to regroup around ruined tanks left them vulnerable to indirect fire. By the time commanders understood the trap, their forward units were already pinned, pushing through farmland while their rear was locked in debris. Into this broken picture came something even more devastating than artillery: the motorized hunters. Ukrainian fighters rode in small groups, each team straddling motorcycles engineered to bolt across open ground at over 70 miles per hour. Night vision scopes mounted to rifles allowed them to pick targets in smoke, while lightweight launchers carried on backs hurled grenades into disorganized squads. Their tactic relied on speed and shock, slashing through the edges of Russian infantry groups before vanishing into ditches or behind barns. Above them, drones hovered silently, tracking movement with thermal sensors. Every heat signature became a mark for coordinated fire. Retreating soldiers exposed their positions as glowing outlines, followed seconds later by precision mortar shells plunging from the sky. Where one squad fell, another tried to scatter, only to find mortar fire tracking them as well. The ground became a circle of closing pressure, directed not by coincidence but by constant feedback between drones overhead and artillery dug in nearby. Radios intercepted by Ukrainians confirmed the spreading panic. Officers giving orders could not track their own men as positions shifted in minutes. Some squads even began firing at shadows, unsure whether the movement in fields belonged to enemies or their own comrades. The pivotal shift occurred in seconds. Ukrainian networks carried a secure order across multiple fronts. The enemy is broken. Press forward. With that signal, armored columns of oplot tanks pushed in from opposite flanks. Their treads crushed earth around the wrecks, forming a steel wall sealing the last workable escape routes. Russian units should have withdrawn before the trap closed, but waited too long for direction that never came. Now they were isolated in pockets, forced into uneven firefights without coordination, while breathing in the smoke of their own burned vehicles. Where hours earlier their cannons gutted hospitals and evacuation buses, they now faced merciless targeting focused strictly on combat squads. It was a reversal, precision against indiscriminate firepower. By dawn, searches across the battlefield confirmed the scale of the defeat. More than 70 Russian armored vehicles were abandoned, in flames or stuck beyond recovery. Reports tallied over 600 troops neutralized, many caught in fields they once believed open. What was meant to be a decisive breakthrough collapsed into a rout with no gains to show except twisted wreckage. Russia's advance relied on massed firepower, but the weight of machines could not overcome planning. Traps dug with shovels, tunnels carved beneath barns, and artillery guided by drones showed how low-tech preparation fused with modern eyes in the sky could fracture an army many times larger. Yet in the wreckage, a different picture emerged. Ukrainian soldiers reached captured positions, and one offered his canteen to a wounded Russian teenager, too injured to walk. That moment cut through the firestorm itself. Strategy shapes battles, but compassion defines humanity. Share your thoughts. Can wisdom and foresight truly overpower brute violence in modern war?